If you have leftovers in your fridge right now, you might want to pause before you microwave them again. Because there are certain foods that, when reheated the wrong way over and over, may quietly increase your exposure to compounds that many doctors and researchers have linked to higher cancer risk over time. This isn't about one meal ruining your health, it's about a habit repeated for years that most people have never been warned about. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which 4 foods deserve a second look in your kitchen, why they matter more after 60, and what you can do instead starting tonight. Here's something most people don't think about. As we get older, our bodies become a little less efficient at clearing out toxins and repairing cellular damage. That doesn't mean anything is wrong with you, it's simply part of how aging works. But it does mean that small, repeated exposures, the kind that might not have bothered you much at 35, can matter more at 65, 70, or 80. That's why understanding these 4 foods isn't about fear. It's about giving your body a little less to fight against, so it can spend its energy on the things that actually keep you strong, sharp, and independent. It's also worth thinking about this in terms of simple math. If a habit repeats itself 2 or 3 times a week, that's over 100 times a year and well over 1,000 times across a decade. No single instance of reheating a plate of leftovers is going to change your health outcome, but 1,000 small instances repeated quietly in the background of everyday life are exactly the kind of thing that adds up in ways we don't usually notice until years later. This is the same reasoning doctors use when they talk about sun exposure or salt intake or sitting for long periods. It's rarely the single event that matters, it's the pattern. Let me tell you about someone many of you might relate to. A woman named Carol, 68 years old, from a small town in Ohio, used to pride herself on never wasting a single meal. Sunday dinner became Monday lunch. Monday lunch became Tuesday's quick reheat in a hot pan before rushing out the door. She did this for decades, just like her mother before her, and just like millions of households across the country still do today. Carol wasn't doing anything wrong by today's standards of common sense. She was being resourceful. But resourcefulness and awareness aren't always the same thing, and that's exactly the gap this video is here to close. Before we go further, let's be clear about something important. No single food causes cancer on its own, and no doctor would ever tell you that. Cancer develops from a complex mix of genetics, environment, lifestyle, and time. What we're talking about today is exposure to certain compounds that form when specific foods are reheated at high temperatures, especially when this happens repeatedly. Research has connected some of these compounds to increased risk over the long run. Knowing about them simply gives you the power to make small adjustments, not to panic. Let's start with the first one, and it might surprise you because it's not really a food at all. It's something almost every kitchen has: cooking oil. Many households reuse the same oil for frying more than once. You fry something for dinner, let the oil cool, strain it, and use it again a few days later for something else. It feels efficient, it feels normal. Almost everyone's grandmother did it, but here's what's happening at the molecular level every time oil is heated, cooled, and reheated. High heat breaks down the fats in the oil, and each time you reheat it, that breakdown continues. This process creates compounds called aldehydes, along with other oxidized byproducts. Some research has linked repeated exposure to these compounds with increased inflammation in the body, and certain studies have raised concerns about a connection to increased cancer risk with long-term, repeated use of the same overheated oil, particularly in deep frying. Think of oil almost like a sponge. Each time you heat it, it absorbs a little more stress, a little more chemical change. The first time you use it, that stress is minimal, but by the 3rd, 4th, or 5th reuse, especially if it's been heated to a high smoking temperature each time, the oil is no longer the same substance it started as. It becomes something your body has to work harder to process. Picture a typical Sunday. You fry chicken for dinner, and the oil looks perfectly fine afterwards, so you strain it into a jar and set it aside. A few days later, you use that same jar to fry potatoes. Then later that week, you use it once more for something else entirely. On the surface, nothing about this feels risky. The oil looks clear, it smells normal, but looks and smell don't tell you what's happening at the molecular level. This is a habit passed down through generations, born out of thriftiness rather than any lack of care, and it's exactly the kind of everyday pattern that deserves a second look now that we understand more about it. Now here's a curiosity loop worth holding on to, because the food coming up in a moment might be even more surprising than this one, since it's something almost every family reheats for dinner without a second thought. For now, Let's talk about what you can actually do about the oil issue, because this is where practical advice matters more than fear. First, try to avoid reusing oil that has already reached a high smoking point more than once or twice. Second, when you do reuse oil, store it in a cool, dark place in an airtight container rather than leaving it out on the counter, since light and air both speed up the breakdown process. Third, consider oils that are naturally more heat stable, like avocado oil or refined olive oil for high heat cooking, and save more delicate oils for lower heat or for finishing a dish rather than frying in it. These are small changes, but over years they add up. Now let's move to the second food, and this one might hit close to home because it's a staple in so many households, especially for people who grew up with it as a comfort food. Processed and cured meats, things like bacon, sausage, hot dogs, and deli meats. Here's why reheating matters specifically with this category. Processed meats often contain nitrates and nitrites, which are used as preservatives to keep the meat safe and extend its shelf life. Under normal refrigeration, these compounds are considered safe by food safety authorities. But here's the part most people don't know. When these meats are exposed to high heat, especially through methods like frying, grilling, or reheating in a hot pan, the nitrates and nitrites can convert into compounds called nitrosamines. And nitrosamines have been classified by major health organizations as compounds that may increase cancer risk with regular long-term exposure. So it's not the bacon sitting in your fridge that's the concern. It's what happens when that same piece of bacon gets reheated in a hot skillet the next morning, and then maybe reheated again a day later. Each round of high heat gives those nitrates another opportunity to transform into something your body would rather not deal with. This matters even more for older adults, many of whom grew up in an era when bacon and sausage for breakfast, cold cuts for lunch, and hot dogs for dinner were simply normal, everyday foods. There's no need to feel guilty about that. Nobody had this information decades ago. What matters now is what you do with it moving forward. Think about a typical breakfast routine. You cook a full pack of bacon on Sunday morning, enjoy some fresh, and store the rest in the fridge for the week ahead. Monday morning, you toss a few strips into a hot skillet to crisp them back up. Wednesday, you do it again. By Friday, that same batch of bacon has been exposed to high heat multiple separate times, not counting the original cooking. Individually, none of these moments feel significant, but it's the accumulation over months and years, meal after meal, that researchers are most interested in understanding. So, what's the practical fix? You don't necessarily have to give up these foods entirely, and no doctor would expect you to abandon a meal you enjoy. Instead, focus on gentler reheating methods. A short reheat in the microwave at lower power, just enough to warm the food through, exposes it to far less intense heat than searing it again in a hot pan. If you do want to pan fry, keep the heat moderate rather than high, and reheat only once rather than multiple times over several days. And when possible, choosing nitrate-free or naturally cured versions of these meats can reduce the starting amount of these compounds in the first place. Now, here's something worth sitting with for a moment. The next food on this list is one that almost nobody thinks of as risky, because it seems like the healthiest possible choice you could reheat for dinner, but the way many people prepare and store it might be working against them. Stay with me, because this one might change how you make your favorite side dish. The third food is starchy foods that have been fried or roasted and then reheated the same way again. Think about crispy roasted potatoes, French fries, hash browns, or even toasted bread that gets popped back into a hot oven or air fryer to crisp up again. Here's the science behind this one, explained simply. When starchy foods are cooked at high dry heat, whether that's frying, roasting, or toasting, a natural chemical reaction occurs between sugars and an amino acid in the food. This reaction creates a compound called acrylamide. It's the same reaction responsible for that golden brown color and crispy texture we all love. A little acrylamide forms during normal cooking, and that's generally considered a low-level, everyday exposure. But when you reheat those same starchy foods using another round of high, dry heat, especially in an air fryer or hot oven, you're essentially giving that reaction a second chance to happen. This increases the total acrylamide content of the food. Health agencies in multiple countries have flagged acrylamide as a probable human carcinogen based on animal studies and ongoing human research, which means it's worth minimizing where reasonably possible, even though the everyday risk from occasional exposure is considered low. This one catches people off guard because reheating potatoes or toast feels so harmless. It's not like reheating a heavy, greasy dish. It's crispy crispy. It's light. It feels like a good choice. But the crispier and more brown the reheated food gets, the more acrylamide is likely present. Imagine roasting a big tray of potatoes for Sunday dinner, more than your family can finish in one sitting. The extra goes into the fridge, and a couple of days later, you pop them into the oven or air fryer to crisp them back up for a quick side dish. That second round in high, dry heat is doing more than just restoring texture. It's giving that same sugar and protein reaction another opportunity to occur, right there on the surface of every piece. The dish looks identical to how it did the first time. It tastes just as good, maybe even better. But its chemistry has quietly shifted. So what can you actually do here? The simplest fix is to reheat these foods more gently. Using a microwave, even though it won't give you that same crunch, dramatically reduces additional acrylamide formation compared to a second round in the oven or air fryer. If texture matters to you and you really want that crispiness back, try reheating at a lower temperature for a slightly longer time rather than blasting it with high heat. And when you're cooking these foods fresh in the first place, aim for a golden yellow color rather than a deep brown or blackened crust, since darker color generally means more acrylamide formed during that first cook. Now for the fourth and final food, and this is the one that ties everything together because it combines two of the issues we've already talked about. Charred or well-browned meat, particularly from grilling, that gets reheated using high heat again. When meat is cooked at very high temperatures, especially over an open flame or a very hot grill, two types of compounds can form. Heterocyclic amines created when muscle proteins are exposed to high heat, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which can form when fat drips onto an open flame and smoke rises back up onto the meat. Both of these compound families have been studied for their potential link to increased cancer risk with frequent long-term exposure to well-done, charred, or heavily smoked meats. Here's the piece most people miss. If that grilled steak, chicken, or burger already has some char on it from the first cooking, and then you reheat it later by throwing it back on a hot grill, back in a scorching pan, or under a broiler, you're not just warming up the meat, you're potentially cooking it at high heat for a second time, which can increase the concentration of these same compounds even further. This doesn't mean grilling is off limits, and it doesn't mean you need to avoid your favorite backyard cookout. Grilling in moderation as part of a varied diet is something most health professionals are comfortable with. The concern grows specifically with frequent, heavily charred, high-heat reheating over time, which is a pattern many people fall into without realizing it, especially when meal prepping large batches of grilled protein for the week ahead. Consider a common summer habit. You grill a large batch of chicken or steak over the weekend, planning to use it for meals throughout the week, which is genuinely a smart, time-saving strategy. But on Tuesday, instead of gently warming a portion in the microwave, you toss it back onto the grill or under the broiler to bring back that fresh off-the-grill taste and char. That second exposure to intense direct heat is where the concern deepens, layering more of these compounds onto meat that already picked some up during the original cook. The practical solution is refreshingly simple. When reheating grilled or charred meat, use gentler methods. A microwave with a splash of broth or water to keep it moist, a covered pan on low heat, or even eating it cold in a salad are all far better choices than blasting it under a broiler or back onto a hot grill. And when you're grilling in the first place, trimming visible fat before cooking reduces flare-ups, which in turn reduces the smoke and char that forms on the meat's surface. Before we bring everything together, let's clear up a common myth because you may have heard the opposite advice at some point. Many people believe the microwave itself is the problem, that microwaving food somehow creates dangerous compounds or destroys all its nutrition. This idea has circulated for years, but it isn't well supported by the research we have today. In fact, when it comes to the four foods we've discussed, the microwave is usually the safer choice precisely because it heats food more gently and more evenly than a dry pan, oven, or open flame without producing the same high-heat browning reactions. The concern was never about the appliance. It was always about the intensity and repetition of dry heat, which is exactly why a lower power microwave setting tends to be the gentlest option of them all. Another myth worth addressing is the idea that freezing leftovers somehow prevents these compounds from forming in the first place. Freezing is genuinely useful for food safety and can extend how long leftovers stay fresh, which is worth doing, but it doesn't change what happens once you reheat the food. A frozen piece of bacon or a frozen tray of roasted potatoes will still go through the same high heat reaction once you bring it back to temperature using a hot pan or oven. Freezing buys you time. It doesn't change the reheating method that matters most. Let's step back for a moment and bring all four of these together, because the pattern connecting them is more important than any single food on this list. In every case, the concern isn't the food itself. Bacon, potatoes, oil, and grilled meat are not enemies. The concern is high, dry, repeated heat. Every one of these four foods becomes more of a concern specifically because of a second, third, or fourth round of intense heat exposure. That's genuinely good news because it means the fix isn't about giving up foods you love, it's about changing how you bring them back to life the next day. So let's talk practically about what a healthier reheating routine actually looks like, because knowledge without action doesn't do much for your health. The single most powerful change you can make is choosing your reheating method wisely. A microwave used at medium power for a slightly longer time rather than full power for a short burst gently warms food through without exposing it to the same intense dry heat as a pan, oven, or air fryer. It won't give you that crispy texture back, but it dramatically reduces the formation of these concerning compounds. If texture truly matters to you, a middle ground option is using the oven or air fryer at a lower temperature, somewhere around 300 degrees Fahrenheit rather than 400 or higher, for a slightly longer time. This still crisps food up reasonably well while reducing the intensity of the heat exposure. Another simple habit worth adopting is reheating food only once. Many households will reheat the same leftovers 2 or 3 times over several days, taking a little out, warming it, putting the rest back, and repeating the cycle. Each round of reheating adds another layer of exposure. Instead, try portioning leftovers into individual servings before refrigerating them, so each portion only ever needs to be reheated one time. Adding moisture when reheating can also help, particularly with meats. A splash of broth, water, or sauce not only helps prevent the food from drying out, but it also helps moderate the surface temperature during reheating, since the moisture absorbs some of that heat energy before it fully transfers into the food itself. And finally, consider variety. If oil-fried foods, cured meats, crispy starches, and charred meats show up on your plate every single day, the small exposures add up over months and years. But if these are enjoyed a few times a week alongside steamed vegetables, fresh fruit, whole grains, and gently cooked proteins like baked fish or poached chicken, your overall exposure drops significantly, even if you never give up any of your favorite comfort foods entirely. There's one more habit worth mentioning, and it's perhaps the simplest of all. Pay attention to color and smell when reheating. If a reheated food smells sharper, more burnt, or noticeably different than it did fresh, that's often a sign it's been pushed too far by heat. Trust that instinct. Your senses developed over a lifetime for a reason, and they're often a reliable, practical guide even without knowing the exact chemistry behind what's happening on the plate. It also helps to think about the size of your batches. Cooking a smaller amount more frequently rather than a large batch meant to be reheated many times throughout the week naturally reduces how often any single portion goes through that second or third round of high heat. This might mean cooking every 2 or 3 days instead of once a week, which takes a bit more planning, but many people find it also means fresher, better tasting meals overall, since food generally tastes best the first time it's prepared. Let's go back to Carol for a moment, the woman we talked about at the beginning of this video. After learning about this, she didn't throw out her frying pan or stop eating bacon on Sunday mornings. She simply changed one small habit. Instead of reheating leftovers in a hot skillet throughout the week, she started portioning meals into smaller containers and warming them gently in the microwave, saving the stovetop and oven for fresh cooking only. She still enjoys the same meals she always has. The only thing that changed is how those meals come back to life the next day. That's really all this video is asking of you too. It's worth saying clearly because this matters. None of this means you did something wrong by reheating your dinner in a hot pan for the last 30 years. Nobody grew up with this information. Your grandmother crisping up leftover fries in a hot skillet wasn't making a mistake. She simply didn't have access to the research we have today. The goal here isn't guilt. It's simply giving you one more tool to protect your health as you move forward, starting with tonight's dinner if you'd like. It's also worth remembering that no single habit determines your health outcome. Genetics, overall diet pattern, physical activity, stress levels, sleep quality, and regular medical checkups all play a much bigger role than any one food choice. Small, consistent improvements like the reheating habits we've talked about today work best as part of a broader, balanced lifestyle, not as an isolated fix. And if you ever notice unexplained symptoms, unusual fatigue, digestive changes, or anything that concerns you, please don't try to self-diagnose based on a video. Bring it to a qualified healthcare provider who can properly evaluate what's going on. So let's bring it all together. Cooking oil that's been reheated multiple times can break down into compounds linked to inflammation and, with long-term exposure, potentially increased cancer risk. Processed and cured meats, when reheated at high temperatures, can convert their preservative nitrates into nitrosamines, compounds associated with increased risk over time. Starchy, fried, or roasted foods, when reheated with another round of high, dry heat, can increase their acrylamide content, a compound flagged as a probable carcinogen by health authorities. And charred or well-browned grilled meats, when reheated using intense heat again, can build up higher levels of heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. The fix for all four is refreshingly consistent. Reheat gently using a microwave or lower oven temperature rather than high, dry heat. Reheat only once, add moisture where you can, and enjoy these foods as part of a varied, balanced diet rather than a daily habit. If you only remember one thing from this entire video, let it be this: it's not what you cook, it's how many times and how intensely you bring it back to life afterward. That single shift in thinking is enough to guide almost every decision in your kitchen from here on out, without needing to memorize a single chemical name or research study. Small changes like these are exactly the kind of thing that don't cost you anything, don't require giving up the foods you love, and don't demand a complete lifestyle overhaul. They simply ask you to reheat a little differently starting tonight. One last thing before we wrap up. If any of this brought up questions about your own health, your current diet, or symptoms you've been noticing, please don't try to work through those alone based on a video, even one as thorough as this one. A conversation with your doctor, especially one who knows your personal health history, is always the right next step for anything that concerns you. This video is here to inform and empower you, not to replace the personalized guidance only a healthcare professional can give. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these four foods surprised you the most? Was it the cooking oil, the processed meat, the crispy potatoes, or the grilled meat? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, tell me where you're watching from and how old you are. This community is full of people just like you, learning small, practical ways to protect their health as they age, and your comment might be exactly what someone else needed to read today. If this video gave you something useful, consider sharing it with a friend or family member who could use this reminder too. And if you'd like more videos like this one, covering practical, doctor-informed health habits for the years ahead, make sure you're subscribed because there's a lot more valuable information coming your way.